In many ways, this book that I wrote, The Influential Author, is a meta book because it's a book about how to write books. I consider a book to be kind of the standard for ideas that matter in all the forms that ideas can take and spread, especially nowadays with social media, and we're doing video content right now. That's a relatively modern form for ideas to take. Even with all this innovation and ways that we can share ideas through evolving social media and technology, books still have a very, very strong place in our society and probably always will, and particularly printed books. Even though ebooks and audiobooks are quite popular now, we still love this idea of a book we can hold in our hands. It's made roughly the same way as books a couple hundred years ago, or shortly after the advent of the printing press. Not much has really changed in the form that a book takes. So if you've got something important to say, a book might be the best format for you to get your ideas down and out into the world. And with the recent developments in self-publishing and print-on-demand technology, that's much easier to do now. You don't have to try to get a contract with a major publishing house, and you get to stay in control of exactly what goes into your book if you're able to figure out how self-publishing works. So that's what this book is all about, both the production process and the publication process for independent authors who want to publish at the standards of traditional publishing.
So you mentioned physical versus, you didn't say versus, but you expect physical books to be around a long time. You've read Anti-Fragile, right?
Yes, a long time ago, but yeah.
You may not remember him mentioning a very important point about the books are an example that we don't have to know why, and people come up with all sorts of reasons why physical books, like the smell, the feel, the blah. We don't know why. We just know there is something more to it, something more that physical books give us than digital. There have also been like studies that suggest greater comprehension, blah. But again, if you go down level, we don't know why, and we don't necessarily need to know why. Hopefully, I don't know why, but we know that physical books hold some kind of place in our minds. They work really well for reasons that are possibly very complex. So
It's
yeah,
probably
digital,
many
they
reasons.
work, but
Yeah.
physical is king,
If I had to
I
speculate,
think, anyway.
in addition to the artistic value of like having a book on your shelf and the cover and just maybe it has something to do with helping us conceive of the ideas, the content in a book as a physical thing, physical organization behind
Maybe.
ideas. I feel like that has something to do.
Man is an animal.
Man is an animal, and so is woman.
Man meaning humans.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
I'm just messing
yeah.
with you. Yeah, because as a writer of a book, that's how I feel too when I hold one of my own books. It's like this is a collection, a structure of my ideas. A portion of my paradigm has been organized into this physical format. It's really interesting the first time you do it. Even now, still the first time I see it.
Ideas made concrete.
Yeah, yeah, it creates that kind of physical association in the mind between ideas, the words that represent them, and now this physical object that like contains and organizes them.
Be really cool if that's it. I'm guessing you didn't just think of that just now. If you
No,
did, that would be very impressive.
I've thought about this kind of stuff a lot, of course, since I first became an author.
Like, why physical? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
that's
I
what I
don't,
mean.
I don't know. I also described it as kind of like an external hard drive for your ideas. If it sometimes, every time so far that I've written a book, it feels like I'm liberating space within my brain to focus on other things. Because I usually write about things that I think about a lot, right? If there's a particular subject that is on my mind a lot, and I have a lot to say about it, that's when I start to get the idea, oh, I should write a book about this. And of course, you're thinking about it a lot in the process of drafting and editing up until it's ready to be published. But then after I've published it, it's like I'm free from that burden of thinking about that thing now. My thoughts are already there. They
I
exist to a
wonder if there's
tangible
a
thing.
hazard there. I wonder if there's a hazard there. I'm free to stop thinking about
Well,
this.
it's not
I
like I
mean, I guess
forget
not that
the
much if you made a
knowledge.
second edition,
Well, yes,
because it was still on your mind enough to do that.
right.
It didn't. You didn't go, oh, never thinking about this again. Woohoo!
No, it's not like I
So
forget the
maybe not that much of a
information,
hazard.
right? Like that might be concerning if like I was literally deleting it from my brain, but it no longer
No,
takes
but
up
I mean
active conscious
thinking
thought.
more and like developing your ideas more. Um,
Well, the
that's what I meant
process of
to
drafting and
expand its
editing
thinking.
forces you to develop your ideas quite a bit. You know, fill in the holes in your knowledge, realize when things aren't coming across as clearly as they should, when you're being redundant, when you've skipped certain steps, right? So
But do you
that's
think you're
very
ever done? Like once you've written a book, are you done completely learning about that subject
no,
and never
no, no,
want
no,
to
no.
touch it
A
again?
book I have learned, and that's one of the primary pieces of advice given in this book about a book you may want to write, is that a good nonfiction book needs clearly defined boundary conditions. It cannot be
Yes,
every
sir.
single thought I've ever had about a broad subject, right? Which is what a lot of people go into writing their first book thinking, right? Because
Ayn Rand actually mentions that as a hazard in her own The Art of Nonfiction,
mhm,
which
I've
seems
read
to
that.
parallel your book
Yes.
in some ways.
I read that after I wrote the first edition of my book, and I was
The
impressed by,
correct order, given that you were writing one.
yes, I was impressed by how parallel our perspectives were. She gives a lot of the same advice I do in different ways and different wording, but clearly we're thinking in similar ways about the process of book creation.
Hopefully, you don't get sued by her ridiculous estate.
And no, that won't happen. Um, but it is true that there is this stereotype, this cliche that most amateur authors, part of the reason self-published books or first books suck is because authors don't have any self-control. They just think, oh my God, people are going to read what I have to say. Here's everything I've ever thought about this thing, right? And there could be lots of value somewhere in that.
500 plus pages.
Yeah. If you've worked in a certain field for many, many years, certainly you have some interesting things to say about that field, right? And so somewhere in your book, you've probably hidden some interesting, unique, valuable thoughts about your experience working there. But there's no defined structure to it. There's no self-imposed limitation about what I'm not going to talk about because it's not strictly relevant to what the purpose of this book is, right? They just go into it thinking, here's everything that's ever happened to me during my career and every thought I've ever had about this. And that does not make for a good, entertaining, and efficient book.
No, sir. Can you start from that? You dump everything and then edit down, or do
That's
you
usually
need
how drafting
to
goes.
give do you need to give strong boundaries in the first place to make the process not awful and have to jettison like 90% or some ridiculous percent of what you write? Do you have to already set boundaries and like before you start or before you get so much of the way into writing the draft, like, oh, boundary, I'm not actually going to talk about this subjects within it, which is relevant, but it would bulk it out more.
Mhm.
Like, do you have to do that, or is it just worth you dump everything down and see what works?
So there are a few ways to address that problem. One is it first depends on how clearly defined your idea for your book is, which can either be very, very clearly defined or you're just kind of figuring it out as you draft it. And if it's already clearly defined, then you're going to know much earlier on what kinds of information, what kinds of anecdotes, what kind of research is worth including in the book. But if you're figuring it out as you go, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything you're going to end up having to remove from the final draft is worthless. It just means it's not appropriate in this particular book. So you get into the habit of asking yourself a series of questions like, okay, this paragraph here, is there something of potential value in this paragraph? Would anyone ever have a reason to read this paragraph and gain something from it? If no, then just delete it. It shouldn't be here. It's just taking up space. If yes, but it's not appropriate for this book, it's not something that they need to see in this book. It's not significantly adding to the experience of this book, but it still could be valuable. You put it in a different sandbox draft where you collect your thoughts and you go back over everything that you went through the trouble of writing down, but realized you don't yet have the appropriate place to publish it.
How are you able to do that with a single paragraph? Because surely the standard for a paragraph is, does it enhance the book as a whole were enough to warrant its being there? So do you have to keep in mind the entirety of your book as you look at a paragraph? So I
Yes.
have the entirety of my book in my
Yes.
head, and you compare the two versions, paragraph out, paragraph in.
So, to do this effectively, I've realized you need a very, very good working memory because you need to be able to
Ah,
conceive of everything that's in your book. Not every single word memorized word for word, but you need to know, okay, yeah, in the first chapter, I'm talking about this, and then this, and then this. You know roughly where everything is in the book. You know what you've already talked about. You know the tone you're using throughout the book. So then when you're assessing that individual paragraph somewhere in chapter 8, you have a working context of the entire book to guide your decision making. Because, of course, you can't just look at that one paragraph in isolation and say, hey, I liked this paragraph. It has to be then seen through the context of the whole working draft up
yeah.
to that point, right? And so that's really the hardest part of editing is being able to keep that overhead perspective on the totality of the experience of reading the book, not just the individual paragraph.
So there's memory. To what extent can you do that conceptually? So hold like the key aspects of your book in mind conceptually as you go through paragraph by
Mhm.
paragraph, like basic outline sort of conceptual idea of your book and what's in it. To what extent can you do that rather than go, this specific point is in it, these specific hundreds of points, hundreds of key points are in it. To what extent can you condense those into like seven, say, key points, something like that? That seems to be around the human limit for certain kinds of items of memory.
Right. So the way I always tell people, I've worked with a lot of people now to help them draft their own nonfiction through my company Identity Publications. And the starting piece of advice I always tell people who are usually quite confused. They don't usually have like a really clear idea of what their book is going to be when they start, and they need to figure it out through the drafting process. I say, okay, start by writing down the things you know have to be in this book in some form. That's usually easy to start with.
Right.
You know, okay, I have to talk about this thing that happened to me when I was 10 years old. I have to talk about what's going on in the war in the Middle East right now. I have to talk about how much I love my cat, whatever, right? Depending on what the book is. But there
Middle
could
East and how much you love your cat in the same book. Interesting.
potentially there could be a book that has that. I'm just throwing out random ideas. But that's kind of my point, that what you consider essential to be in the book is entirely up to you. You're defining the pillars of the book. You're defining what the core of the book is. So, like in my case in the book I'm currently writing that's almost done, my book on romantic idealism and the masculine experience of love and sex and so forth. Um, a huge amount of it is my personal experiences, anecdotes that happened to me and what I learned from them, and a huge amount of it is philosophical waxing. Like, hey, here's how I think this might work on a deep level. And a huge amount of it is like evolutionary biology, trying to understand why men and women are different and respond to things differently, right? And
Evo
so,
Psycho.
mhm. So it was pretty easy before I ever actually began, seriously drafting, knowing, okay, I have to talk about, when these experiences happened to me. Definitely these sexual experiences were very formative in my memory and taught me a lot about how this aspect of life works. And I definitely need to mention like this common problem that shows up between men and women when they argue about bullshit. Like that's definitely going to be a core theme throughout the book. So then I just start writing those things. And there doesn't have to be much logic or reason or structure to them. It just has to be, hey, this thing happened to me. Here's what I learned. Oh, have you ever noticed that men and women do this differently? You know, and maybe it's just a few sentences, maybe it's a few paragraphs. It just depends how much I have to say at that particular time. And then later is when the reordering and the restructuring comes, and I realize, okay, I have to discuss these things before these other things will make sense, right? Like we have to lay the groundwork of these basic premises behind the book before I can get into more details. So then you realize, okay, well, obviously these have to go somewhere earlier in the book than these ones. And that's how you eventually break it down into chapters where everything has a logical, comprehensive flow. And when you have that logical, comprehensive flow in your mind, it's a lot easier to remember what you've already talked about and where everything is in the book because it's not just randomly jumbled around.
Yeah, you tend to lose logical order when you really know something because you know all the points. They don't have to go, oh, this came first, and then I got to this by thinking from there. It's like, oh, I know this and I know this. And then you have to, if you can lose like the order, and then if you're writing, basically have to rederive it, right?
Yes. You have to be a fantastic organizer of your ideas. So a lot of people who may have lots of really interesting and valuable things to say are not necessarily very good at organizing their ideas, and such people tend to hire editors like me to help them organize their ideas. It's not ghostwriting because they're not writing the
Yeah.
book for them, but it's rather they're giving me the info dump version of the book and saying, turn this into
Yeah, let's
something
not get into
competent.
ghostwriting.
Yeah. Yeah, because that there's a lot of great things to say about ghostwriting, and like AI generation is a very common thing now, like pseudo authors who just have ChatGPT write a book.
Oh, was it you who came up with that quote, or did you just, was it someone else and you posted it, or mentioned it to me? If it's not worth writing, it's something like, if it's not worth writing, it's not worth reading, but to do with the AI generated stuff. But it was like more eloquent than that. What
That
was
may
it?
have
It
been a
was
quote from
definitely
me.
you. Could find it if
Okay,
you posted it.
here's the paragraph I'm talking about. See what I just did there? I knew that I talked about this in this book. I don't remember word for word what I wrote, but I knew that in particular there was a paragraph addressing this thing you're talking about. And I knew what chapter of the book it was in, roughly where it went, because this book is meticulously well organized. So I thought, okay, that's in the chapter on drafting and alternative methods of drafting, where I include AI as one potential alternative method of drafting. So I very quickly found that subsection. I didn't even need to look at the table of contents. I just knew roughly where it was in the book. Because this book, like all my books, is
Possibly also
meticulously
because
well
it's a
organized.
physical copy.
Yes, if I were scrolling through a PDF or an ebook, it'd be harder to do that, right?
It doesn't have a beginning, end, and
Yes,
thickness and all
it's
that
easier for
stuff.
me to
Like,
think of my
where is it?
ideas as physical things in this in this format, which is ironic because if you know anything about me, if you could see around my room here, you'd know I'm very bad at organizing physical things in general, but I'm very good at organizing ideas as a physical thing. So that's, I don't know why that is exactly, but that's very strange. Um, Here's what I wrote about AI generation for
Clean your room, man.
Yeah, clean your room and wash your penis.
Clean your room. Fucking
It's
hell.
Jordan Peterson for people who don't know
Wash
the
your
reference.
room. Clean your penis.
I do at least one of those two things. I won't tell you which one. Here's what I write about AI generation for book production. Chatbots can also be valuable because they allow you to see how commonly available certain information already is. If the book you want to write could be written for you by artificial intelligence, perhaps it is not the book you should be writing. There should be
Ah,
something unique about your voice, perspective, or expertise, or else it might as well be created for you by machines. AI content generation reminds us of the importance of creating something only we can say. As this technology is sure to keep rapidly developing, authors should pay attention to how its advances affect book production in the near future. So, what I mean to convey there is not that ChatGPT and other programs like it are inherently evil. I've used them for things like helping edit book descriptions, like the stuff that goes on the back of the book, just because that has very specific style requirements. So I provide the content, the ingredients, and say make this work as a book description, and then I take what it gives me and I edit it some more. But I would never use it to try to write a book, of course, and claim it was my voice. But the point I'm making there is that all AI can do is tell you what it would expect someone to say based off of the information it has about what people commonly say about these things, right? So therefore, by definition, it cannot be your original unique viewpoint. It can only recycle things that have already been said, already established as common knowledge, basically. So what the fuck would be the point of writing a book of things that have already just been established as common knowledge? Because that's all a chatbot can do, just recycle common knowledge. If you're writing a book, if you're going to go through the very, very arduous process of producing something worth reading at a professional level in the form of a book, it takes me about a year to write and produce a book, and I've already done this several times. It should be something that only you could say, something that has not
Did
been
you
said in a
say
form
1
that
year?
has not been said. Yeah, typically about a year so far. I'd like to get that down to about 6 months. We'll see if I can manage that.
Nice.
But that's the whole point of this book and of wanting to write a book in the first place, is to write something only you could write in a form only you could write it. Either because it's your unique personal experiences, you have some kind of expertise that isn't widely known. So ask ChatGPT, hey, if you were going to write a book about this thing I want to write a book about, what would you write in that book? And then do the opposite of that. That's a great way to use ChatGPT. Don't do what ChatGPT would do, because it means that if ChatGPT knows to do it, it's already cliche at that point. A pretty good motivator for me to think of what book I need to write next and what kind of information to include is if I'm really disappointed in the information that's already available. If you read 10 popular books on a subject and they all say the same bullshit that's not very helpful, and you're left disappointed and you're wondering like I'm trying to get something deeper out of this, but everyone just keeps recycling the same bullshit. So maybe I can be the
And
guy
it's
who
filling
writes
a
the
gap
deeper book.
that it's filling a gap that you personally want
Yes.
filled. That's kind of what I mean.
That's
Like
why I wrote
your
this book.
essence, it's
Ironic,
something
yeah.
burns within you that you have to actually get ideas out about.
Yes. So I started writing The Influential Author not because I had a good amount of experience in self-publishing and writing and felt like I had a lot to say. Of course I did, but also because I was very frustrated that there are dozens of books about how to write and self-publish on Amazon, and I have read a large handful of them, and they are all horrible. They're all shitty. They're all like 100 pages long and just repeat the same bullshit about top 10 tips to get more people to buy your ebook. And I really
That's
was
that 100
disappointed.
pages sounds like not long enough, but from your description, it also sounds like too long.
Yeah, it's the worst of both worlds. It's like low density content and not enough of it somehow. You see what I mean? It's like a giant box of styrofoam. The box is too big and its content is mostly air. This book is actually the opposite in that measure, in that it's substantially longer than every other book on the subject of writing and self-publishing. It's about 400 pages, which is either a positive or a negative depending on what kind of reader you are, right? Because a lot of readers would say, I don't want to read 400 pages about this. Just give me the top 10 tips, you know?
You
Or
do provide summaries.
I do provide chapter summaries, yeah, for that purpose. But another type of reader, like me, the type of reader I am, would say, "Oh, sweet, 400 pages, what a great deal. I'm getting a lot of of content in that really long book." But also, the book is not
That's me too.
the content
If
within
it's
those
worth it.
400 pages is not styrofoam. It's dense, it's meaningful.
Hmm.
On every page, you're going to learn something useful and something that makes you like actually think about how you're gonna write your book and approach this thing and turn you into a fucking influential author, as the title implies, right? So it's both dense and large, which is what she said.
What do you think are the main points your book, The Influential Author, covers, the other books you saw did not cover?
Well, I'll give you a comparison. I have been struggling for years now to figure out how to branch into other types of content. Social media content, YouTube content, great example, like we're doing right now. Um, and I've read, again, a large handful of books on such subjects, like how to have a successful YouTube channel. And I have been disappointed with every single one I have read for always the same reason. Because although some of them do provide some useful information about like how the YouTube algorithm works and how to pick a good thumbnail and watch time and metrics and stuff like that, they all start from the point of thinking you already know what kind of videos you should be producing and how to produce them. That is where every single one of these YouTube guides starts. It's always starting from, okay, so now that you know what kind of channel you want to make and how you want to do your videos, here's everything you need to know about how YouTube works. And every single time I'm sitting there thinking, did I skip a chapter or like the first half of the book or something? Because it feels like that should be the first thing you address. How to decide what kind of videos you want to make and how to go about making them. Like I feel like I'm missing something there because that seems like the most important part of the process before any of that other stuff matters. If I had the right expertise for it, I would love to write a book about how to decide what kind of videos you should be making for YouTube and how to go about effectively making them, which is almost more like a cultural thing than anything else. It's like addressing the culture of the kinds of videos that people expect to see on YouTube and therefore what will be accepted as a good quality video that people want to see. And that's what I address in this
Is
book.
that expertise something you're working on, the YouTube
It's a long road ahead,
expertise?
but that's why we're doing these videos now. This is my first attempt to foray into the video domain and understand what kind of content people actually want to see from someone like me. But if you don't
I'm
spend
somehow
all
helping
day,
you become a YouTube expert.
yeah, I may write a book about it someday if I actually figure it out. You know,
Cool. Footnote me at some
but
point.
I'm not the kind of person who spends all day watching YouTubers and following what's trending and hot and interesting. So I have no idea, like, what in
Ah,
comparison to what's popular and what people normally do, because I just don't pay attention to those things very much, right? And
I spend more time on YouTube, may be able to help with that.
the people who write the books about YouTube are the kinds of people who already know this stuff like the back of their hand, right? And so they've forgotten what it's like not to know that stuff because they think it's just
Mm.
obvious. Well, here's what people love on YouTube. Well, okay, but I don't know that. Do you see how not everyone knows that, Mr. YouTube guy? Not everyone is Mr. Beast or cares about that shit, right? Like some of us are just living our lives, right? And the reason I could do that with books is because for my entire life I have been reading nonfiction books, some of which have been amazing and life-changing, like a book that completely changed my paradigm about how really important things work. So I had a standard in my mind of what a good, meaningful nonfiction book was well before I ever wrote my first book, right? Well before I wrote
Ah,
about how to write books. And so that was the premise I was working from, that's the kind of book I want to write. I wouldn't want to waste my time writing another kind of book. And I know that there are other authors out there who feel a similar way. That's why the subtitle of this book is How and Why to Write, Publish, and Sell Nonfiction Books That Matter. That's an important qualifier. It's not just how to write an
woo!
Amazon bestseller that will help you get 100 new clients this month. Books that
It's
matter.
got to be
Is that
meaningful.
Yes, books that
Got to
change
be
the way people
meaningful,
think
man.
about something, right? Because there's a certain type of would-be author who shares that ambition and that speaks to and says, okay, finally someone is going to take this fucking subject seriously and really help me become an author who writes a good goddamn book that has a chance of being successful. I wrote this book initially. The inspiration was out of frustration at the shitty low quality guides for how to be an author, how to write a book successfully, and publish it on your own with you being in complete control of it. So I said, hey, I have the knowledge, I have the experience, I've worked now with dozens of people to help them do this. I will write that guide that addresses the things all the other currently existing shitty guides do not address. Yes, this
So
book could not have been written by AI, in other words.
your book is not only on the writing of non-fiction books, but on the publishing and selling. Why did you decide to go into those rather than focusing only on the writing?
Good question. Um, and that is criticism I've received from some readers who just wanted like a simple guide to drafting or editing or whatever, right?
Your book
Um,
does what you wanted it to do and not what I
yes.
want it to
Fuck you. I don't care about what you want. I wrote the book I wanted.
do.
Well, there is a good reason behind that, and that's because I feel like for people to take the message seriously, they had to see that there was a realistic, holistic path ahead of them. What good does it to
Ah,
work on becoming a really good writer and learning what it takes to write a really good book if you don't think it's realistic that it's ever going to get published,
this
right?
is then probably your most concrete book in a way that you specifically, it's more how to than any of your other books,
Yes.
right?
Well, because this is the
And
only
from beginning to end, not just
yes.
part of it.
Because this book, more than any other I've written, is about how to do a specific thing. It's very, very
Yeah.
clear what the boundary conditions of this book are. Speaking of boundary conditions, the whole thing is how to write a really good book and publish it, and with a good chance of it being commercially successful and people loving it, right? So that makes it really easy for me to know what kind of content needs to go in the book because it all needs to be serving that purpose. And so then when you ask a question like, why did you make it about both writing and publishing? Well, because
And
if,
selling.
yeah, and
Wait.
selling. Because if you know all of those things, that gives you everything you need to actually do the thing, right? If you only have one part of that equation, like, oh, a book about how to publish well, hey, that's great. Now I just need to figure out how to write a fucking book. And a book about how to write a fucking book. Okay, but what's the point in me spending a year of my life writing a fucking book if I'm never going to get a publishing deal? And self-publishing is a joke that hardly ever works for anyone. And it's true. Like, only 1% of self-publishers make any appreciable amount of money. I'm part of that 1%. I can live off of my book royalties. I refurbished a house with my book royalties, right? So
Mr.
I'm in
Diehl in the 1%.
yes. I'm not nearly as rich and successful as I could be, but the point is that
If you do you mean if you were to go the traditional publishing route, do you mean you'd
um
be more rich and
well, even
successful
going
that
the
way?
traditional publishing route doesn't guarantee success. There's a chance that your publisher will put many tens of thousands of dollars into promoting your book, but there's also a chance that they could just leave you high and dry and hope that you promote it yourself through your existing social media channel. And if you're going to do that, why not just self-publish then? Like to me, the the biggest advantage of going through a traditional publisher would be is if they were promoting it in ways that you couldn't do on your own. But that's not even a guarantee that they're going to do that.
The whole point of a traditional publisher rather than self-publishing is the marketing, right? They have a base
Well, and
they're
printing
already
and
trusted.
distribution, they can get your book into
Oh,
stores,
right, yes, those two.
but still,
But again, that's part of the, apart from the printing itself, the distribution is the same kind of thing, right? The
yeah,
marketing.
yes. Um, so that's still the one advantage I think that traditional publishing has over self-publishing, independent publishing. But again, that's only if they're actually going to go through the difficulty and the investment of doing that. They don't do that with every author, right? So even if you could get a publishing deal, it's no guarantee that you'd be more successful than if you self-published. I think the statistic is that currently with nonfiction books, the average nonfiction books sells a total of 300 copies in its lifetime.
The mean average or the median average.
I don't remember maths. Which one is which?
Mean is sum divided, so the sum of copies of books sold divided by the number of different books. The median is in the middle. So the mean is subject to strong pull from outliers. So
I think,
J.K.
oh,
Rowling
okay. I
and
think it's the
authors like
mean.
her.
I think it's the mean.
The mean,
Um, Yes. So
Because
that's
that's pushed way up by the massively successful
yes, but it's
authors.
also pushed way down by the millions of self-published books that only ever sell two copies to the author and their mother,
Right.
right? So you're
To the
comparing
author and
both
their
like
mother.
extreme Harry Potter and the nobody self-published author that the millions of those, right?
I haven't read that. Is that an extra one um after Hogwarts?
No.
Harry Potter and the Nobody
Harry Potter
self-published
and the nobody self-published author. No. Another figure I've commonly heard, the benchmark for nonfiction books is 10,000 copies. If your book sells 10,000 copies in its lifetime, that's considered very successful. That's like a huge milestone. That's like kind of amazing. And that's even
Have
traditionally
any
published.
or all or most of your books sold 10,000 copies?
The earliest books that I published have broken that milestone. The more recent ones have
Woo!
not yet, but they're on their way. So again, this is lifetime growth.
10,000
So
making money
yes. If
and,
you could do that,
influencing people.
yeah, both of those are good things. If you could reach that 10,000 in the first year, hey, that's great, but again, the benchmark is lifetime. If there are 10,000 copies of your book in circulation at all, that's a significant milestone, and most nonfiction books never get anywhere near that, right?
And as
So
a self-publisher, you don't just get a cut of it, you get
you're getting
the whole
significantly
thing
larger.
or
Well,
nearer.
some of it goes to Amazon or whoever your print on
Yeah,
demand
that's why I said
distributor is.
nearer.
But it's significantly larger than you would get with a traditional publisher. With a traditional publisher, you'd be getting like a few percent at most, probably, which is great if they're selling millions of copies.
Hundreds of
That's a
times more,
small
yeah.
small slice of a very large pie, right? But here, for ebooks, you can get 70% and slightly less for
Is that
paperbacks.
it? I was thinking
70%
like,
is very good.
God, they take
Yep.
30.
Most ebooks sell for $10, so that's $7 per book sale.
Amazon's gonna fucking rule the world at some point then. Shit.
Yeah. Right. So if you're making
Amazon
$7 per
from
sale and you
Futurama.
sell 10,000 copies, you're the maths genius. Tell me, how much money is that?
What was it? $7 per and
$7
copies?
per copy, 10,000 copies sold.
70,000 if that seven is your cut.
Yeah, that's $70,000. Um, is that a pretty good return on investment for something that took you a year of your life to produce? Well, if you're making less than $70,000 per year, then yeah, that's that's better than your current salary, right? But also that's even ignoring all the
A is
other
A.
A is A, thank you. That's ignoring all the other benefits that writing a somewhat successful book could do. Other income sources it could open up for you, building your brand in whatever ways might be
Get
useful
to
to
work
you,
where you want.
networking with various kinds of people, becoming seen as an authority on various subjects, all the stuff I talk about in this book. But the point is that it is
Get to
definitely,
sit on a beach while tapping away or writing away. That's part of the whole thing. If the alternative is not writing and making a similar amount or more, it might still be worth it
mhm,
because you get to do things on your own terms.
yes, the freedom that comes with it is nice, the sense of fulfillment of having produced something meaningful, and unique art that truly represents your values and your mind. But also, it shows that this can be, you know, a reliable way to make a decent passive income if you do it well. You can make enough money to live off of from your books, right? So that's good incentive to write more books.
Chapter 1, the historical influence of writing. Chapter 2, introspecting what to write about. Those are in part 1, philosophy. Part 2, strategy, is chapter 3, the market ecosystem around your book. Chapter 4, designing the meaning of your message. Oh, yeah, let's go there. What can you say about that one? So the subtopics in that are focus, scope, and resolution, educational structure and flow, the right types of readers. So you talk about the audience and how to fit your book to the audience you have in mind for it.
Yeah, that's just a specialized application of the concept of product market fit, of course, right? You have to produce something that a specific person is going to find really valuable. And this is that chapter in particular. or the first couple chapters, introspecting what to write about, the market ecosystem around your book, designing the meaning of your message. That's essentially all the stuff I was just complaining about how all those YouTube guides don't have that, right? Like they don't tell you here's how to decide what kind of videos to produce and how to produce them, right?
You'll
They
probably
just
be
assume
putting
you
out
know that.
those kinds of videos at some point. Here's how to do YouTube.
Again, if I figure it out, I'd love to be the first one to create that kind of guide in book or video format. But right now, I'm grossly underqualified
The
for it.
YouTuber's YouTuber.
Yeah, sure. Um, but that's if you read some of the reviews on this book, the positive ones, um, people frequently cite, here's the first book on the subject that actually tells you how to do this stuff. It doesn't just say, hey, so you want to write a book? Great. It's like walking you through the process of realizing what kind of book you want to write and why and what form that book is going to take. Like actually pedantically going through every little step because if there's nothing
And you
else I'm good
mentioned
at, I'm
pedantry in the contents. Chapter
yes,
8, proofreading,
pet
pedantry, and punctuation.
yes. I'm a savant for pedantry.
Me too. High five.
Right. And so this is a format where that works really well to my advantage, because I don't skip over things assuming, oh, everyone already knows this. Do they really? Maybe I should explain it to them just in case they don't.
If you thought they do really, you probably wouldn't be an author in the first
Right.
place.
Right.
It's the whole point of writing.
I'm
No, they
explaining
don't.
things that no one else has bothered to explain, either because they don't know, or they know but they can't articulate it very well, or they think they don't have to explain it because it's obvious and everyone knows it.
Yeah.
Right? I'm the kind of person who is in perpetual frustration at people not explaining things they know because they consider it obvious. Well, everyone knows how
It's
to do
obvious
this.
once you know it.
Yeah, like,
That's how
okay, if
integration
you know it, then just
works.
tell me. Why don't you just tell me how it works then? Why don't you take 2 minutes of your time and articulate your knowledge on this thing for me so that I too will know it? Would you rather
Then be
spend
like,
15
no.
minutes criticizing me for not knowing it or 2 minutes explaining it so that I'll know it? A shocking number of people would prefer to spend more time mocking you for not knowing something than just helping you know it.
Well, they get
I never
more
understood
out
that.
of it because they're sadists, I guess.
Yeah. And so
Sadists.
I am the kind of author and just person in general, like if you know me in person, I'm always just like explaining things to people. I have a lot of guests staying in my house now, and I am constantly helping them improve their English or learn new skills or explain something to them that they don't know, not even in a formal structure. That's just the kind of person I am. Just because I like helping
Base.
people know things, right? And very few people can return that favor. Not very many people have the skill set to articulate their knowledge. Even people who are really good at something often do not know how to explain to others what they do. So it's called the curse of knowledge. This is a very common cognitive bias. It's based
Do you
essentially
write about that at all in
in
this
the
book?
introduction to the second edition. Yeah, I do talk about that. Um, because I
Base.
because the whole point of being a good nonfiction author is essentially overcoming the curse of knowledge and bothering to explain things that no one else explains, right? You don't have to be the world's leading expert on something. You just have to be good at explaining what you know.
Knowledge broken down into a format so that it can be used is power.
Yes.
Boom, take that Francis
Useful
Bacon. I
knowledge,
broke down
right?
knowledge is power.
What what is a nonfiction book except an organization of useful knowledge in physical form?
Or interesting. Yours tend to be useful, others may be interesting, but
Entertaining,
right.
sure.
Interesting and hypothetically useful.
Right.
Otherwise,
Entertainment.
they probably wouldn't
And
be
I do talk
interesting.
about the value of entertainment, of course. This is not a dry book. Like I write with a very strong personality with jokes and anecdotes and because entertainment keeps people engaged in what they are doing. And if they are engaged, they're learning better. So I do talk about the importance of personality. I give examples of books I've worked on, like a guide to American taxes for Americans who live overseas, which is probably the driest fucking topic you could think of. I
Was
help.
that Olivier Wagner?
Yes, my friend and accountant, Olivier Wagner. You can check him out at 1040abroad.com. Uh, we mutually came up with the idea of writing this guide to how Americans can handle their tax burden if they live abroad, because it's a really, really complicated subject. If you're an American, we have crazy tax laws. And there were some guides on the subject, but none that were really
You said
comprehensive and
we.
complete. Hmm?
You've been living in Armenia for how many years, and you said we
We?
have crazy tax laws.
America.
You
Well,
said
I'm
we
still
have crazy
American.
tax
Yeah, they still apply to me. All American
laws.
citizens who live abroad still
Oh
are
fuck.
subject to American taxation, hence the need for the book. America is one of only two countries that taxes globally based on citizenship, no matter where you live or work.
Fucking
And
hell.
there were some
Renounce it.
guides. Yeah, I could renounce it. That's one of the subjects covered in the book, renouncing your U.S. citizenship if you want to.
To reduce your taxes on your book earnings.
Yes, so we decided to write, he decided and I helped him produce it, the guide to is the comprehensive process, everything you need to know about paying your taxes back home if you travel a lot. And so that alone probably would have been enough to sell the book, just that it's the first comprehensive guide to the subject. But also throughout the editing process, I advised Olivier, you know, this is a very dry subject. You're a really interesting guy. You need your personality in this book. You need people to be laughing while they read this book and feeling like they're getting to know you. Share some interesting stories and cute little
Now I almost
anecdotes.
want to read it, even though it won't be specifically useful to me here in the UK.
You
If
want to
it's
read it just for the
interesting enough,
cute anecdotes?
no, if it's interesting enough to be interesting, almost makes me want to read it just to see if
Okay,
it really is.
sure.
Does he have other books?
Nope. I have encouraged him to
Ah,
think about writing another book because his first book has been quite successful, actually. It still continues to sell quite well. We update it every year because the tax code changes, so we make adjustments to the book. It still sells quite well. And again, if you go on the Amazon page for it's called US Taxes for Worldly Americans. You read the positive reviews, a lot of them say things like, I never expected to enjoy reading a tax book. I learned a lot, but also I enjoyed this book. It made me smile while I was reading it. There's a lot of personality here. It's not just academic and like a textbook, you know? So that's the
I'm
importance
guessing
of personality.
some of the um, that is in being scathing of the US tax system and how shit it most likely is.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely some critiques. And Olivia has
A
a
is
very
A.
interesting life too, so he has interesting things to talk about. But that's a strong point. No matter how dull and dry and academic you think your subject is, your personality as the author is part of what makes it unique, right? Whether people love it or hate it, I tend to be a love it or hate it kind of writer. Either you're really, really into how I write about things, or you don't care for it at all, and that's fine.
And complain about what you didn't write because you didn't want to write the kind of book that would contain those things.
Yeah, like, I wanted a book
That's one
about
of the
this.
main complaints you talk about, like,
Yeah.
because I guess um, that's the main kind of complaints people would have about your kind of books because you're too thorough, really, for them to
Yes.
complain much about you doing what you set out to do that is
Yes.
good and
Yes.
valid wrong
So
or suboptimally.
it's about knowing how to defy category expectations effectively. Because with certain types of books, especially, people think they know what is going to be in that type of book. They think they know what to expect, and they don't even read the book description, I think, some of the time. They just say, oh, a book about this, I need a book about that. And they think they know what they're getting. But
Always read the book description before you buy the book.
yeah,
A is A.
or just
You
the
can't get
title,
it from the title.
The title might tell you a bit about what kind of book it is.
Can't judge a book by its title.
And I do even, I talk about book reviews in this book because they're essential for newly published books. You got to get social proof that people like your book. You got to get high quality, authentic book reviews on platforms like Amazon and Goodreads. And I say you have to be careful that no matter how good your book is, no matter how much some people love it, there will always be some people who either hate it for legitimate reasons, like that you're just a shitty writer or that you didn't proofread your book, but also many people who hate it for totally illegitimate reasons. And you'll see what those are, that they applied a standard that didn't make any sense whatsoever to the book. Hey, I wanted a funny book and this was a scary book. I don't like scary books. Why'd you buy a scary book then? Hey,
And the better you are as an author and at doing what you intend to accomplish, the more skewed your the negative reviews will be towards you didn't do what I wanted you to do,
yes. The,
rather
the,
than you didn't do what you wanted to do very effectively.
as far as I'm concerned, the absolute standard that applies to critiquing any type of product or art is how well does this do the thing it promised it would do? You can
We
apply
may
that
have a
standard to
slight
anything.
philosophical disagreement there, because I would add in, um, as part of that, is what it intended to do worth doing, or did it need to intend to do something maybe a
Oh,
bit different, very
you mean
different?
like if you were reading the Communist Manifesto or something? Like, okay, so it does what it says it will do, but what it says it will do is bad.
That could be an example, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, then yeah, I'd probably take the approach of, okay, this book promises to teach human beings how to have a peaceful and prosperous economic arrangement, and it does not do
yeah,
that.
there we go. This is what I'm. Yeah, if you go deeper, if it's, yeah, ultimately it doesn't do what you intended or should have
Yeah,
intended to do. That was
sure.
Marx, right? Communist Manifesto.
Yes,
He might have
yes.
actually intended to screw things up, which succeeds his intention, if so. But then it's just, an
Yeah.
evil intention.
I haven't read Mein Kampf, for instance, so I can't judge the quality of the writing or exactly what it contained, but
Citizen on Wissen the Yuga. Obligatory.
yeah, so if I were going to review Mein Kampf, I doubt I'd be saying, oh, I'll give it 3.5 stars because it was pretty well written, but I don't like all the hate and racism. But I do get less of those the more books I write, and I think it's because I get more specific in the type of book I'm writing and who I'm writing for, and I get better at communicating those things.
So there's the, as we just spoke about, the better an author you are, the more your negative reviews will be about people complaining that you didn't write the type of book they want. But the better you are at communicating the kind of book you're writing, the less you'll get those kind of reviews
Yes.
on an absolute level, because
Yeah.
fewer of those people will buy your book.
So that's one
So you bring
reason.
down the total with both of those.
Yeah.
Better
I,
author, better communicator about what you're writing.
I say very clearly in this book that the goal should never be just to sell as many copies as possible. It should be to sell as many copies to the right kind of person as possible, the reader who's going to get the maximum intended value from your work. That's the goal. And so you have to know who that reader is and how they're going to respond to your work and how you can make the book look appealing to them and also unappealing to anyone who isn't them. I'll give you an example. We do beta reading for these kinds of reasons, not just to help improve the writing, like, hey, this doesn't make any sense or you're missing a comma here, but also this book is completely
The
different than
stuff
what
the
I was
author can
expecting.
catch.
Yeah, you want to see people's reactions to see what they were expecting when they went into the book as it was presented to them.
I
With
got to
my
learn that when you're asking me to beta read, that I don't need to be looking for all the little pedantic grammatical stuff. I can just
yeah,
zip
both.
through it
You want
more
the
and look.
macro and the micro. Both are good.
If I go for the micro, though, I won't be getting
Yeah,
very
okay, so
far
in
into
your
the beta
case,
reading.
yeah,
We've had
maybe
that experience, I think.
yeah, focus on the macro. Ignore the micro. With my latest book, Our Global Lingua Franca, the book about how to teach English better.
Oh,
I
glyph, yeah.
Yes, before I had a subtitle for it, I showed it to various academics who work in English education, and a lot of them hated it. Like because they at
Before
first,
you put the subtitle.
yeah. So because all they knew was it was a book about, how to teach English as a foreign language better based on my experiences around the world. And so of course, oh yeah, we work in English, foreign English education. Sounds like a great book for us to look at, right? Except they have very particular expectations about what that means. There's an approved curriculum, a repository of
Isn't this kind
knowledge.
of the whole point of that book? that
Yeah, the
they're
book is
doing
to
it
go
wrong.
against the approved curriculum. That's
So the
that's
book is for them, they just can't bear
right.
it, basically.
So I
They
realized
are
I
the
had
audience, it just doesn't work because
yes.
they're too
I realized my framing
something.
mistake, right? That I couldn't just promote it as a book about how to teach English better because a significant portion of the reader base will think it's one of those conventional textbooks about the approved curriculum of teaching English. Instead, I had to make it clear from the beginning this is an alternative,
Radical, not conventional.
contrarian, countercultural approach for people who realize there is something wrong with the way we conventionally teach English.
Gregory Diehl, countercultural author.
Yeah, so the subtitle after that experience became An Educator's Guide to Spreading English Where EFL Doesn't Work.
Yeah, that
That
was the
doesn't work is an
key.
important qualification for, for the book.
And your subtitle is quite tempered there because your idea is that basically the whole of how it's being done doesn't work on a
Right.
fundamental level, right? So your
Yes.
subtitles are a bit tempered where it doesn't
Yeah,
work. Let's
everywhere
not
is
say
where it
yes
doesn't work.
everywhere.
But the point was for a certain type of reader to see that and say, "Yeah, he's right. It doesn't work. I should read this book." Because people who read that and get like offended, like, "What the fuck do you mean it doesn't work? I've been an English teacher for 30 years." And that kind of person will never get the message I am trying to get across. They will never see the value of the book. I don't want them reading.
Not without strapping them to a chair and like basically just talking to them and correcting them until they get it and they can't leave until they genuinely get it.
That's probably
Basically,
illegal.
people who are bad enough. Oh yeah, definitely. But that might be the only way.
Yeah. So, but
People who are that far gone.
the point is, I went into it knowing, okay, this is never going to be a massive bestseller. A lot of people will not want to read this book. If they did, it would piss them off, but a certain kind of person will love this book. This book is for that type of person only. So that's a boundary condition, right? I had to know. I didn't want the book to be super long anyway. I knew I wanted it to be under 200 pages. I wanted it to be a fairly short practical guide, unlike this one.
Shelley Fort.
I wanted this one to be intimidating. I wanted this one to be like, oh my God, 400 fucking pages. But that one I wanted a short practical guide, right? And so there I have to set boundary conditions. Where am I going to begin explaining things and where am I going to end? I can't backtrack and undo everything you think you know about how all education works.
Do you say in that, oh, there's still plenty more I really want to say, but then the book
No.
would go on.
Although
Uh,
I did have a noteworthy conversation shortly after I wrote about this on Facebook because it was so interesting. I had a noteworthy conversation here in Armenia with a group of educators that I showed the book to. I said, well, the book is about common flaws in the way we teach English and why it doesn't work as well
oh
as it
no.
could. And I shared some examples from the book, and they all kind of agreed with me, like, oh yeah, that's actually really thought-provoking, and
Oh,
we shouldn't
cool.
force people to speak English. We should give them like organic incentives to want to speak English. That makes a lot of sense, Gregory. And then what did they say? I don't want to misquote them, but they said something like, you know, but if the way we teach English for all the reasons you're describing is wrong, doesn't that mean that the way we teach everything is wrong?
Ah, they picked up on.
And I swear to God, I didn't want to like grab him and kiss him and say thank you for seeing
You
that.
did want to, but you didn't.
I just kind of smiled and nodded like that makes a lot of sense. Something to think about. Like I
Ah,
didn't
I
want to
wouldn't have been. I
say
wouldn't have done the kissing thing, but I wouldn't have been able to avoid pouncing on it. And yeah,
right
I'd be too
because
excited and thinking that there's promise of getting them to understand even more, making it
yes,
click.
this is going to sound really arrogant, but when you know this much more than the people you're talking to about the subject, it takes great finesse not to overwhelm them with how much righter you are than them.
I thought you were saying writer as in writing.
No, how much
So
more
how
right,
much more of a
more
writer?
correct you are. You have to be delicate and just present ideas, conclusions, like simple little, like, hey, have you noticed this? Or examples, right? Or simple little premises. Like I think people learn English better when you give them organic reasons to want to learn English, then rather than strapping them to a chair and forcing them to memorize words. What do you think? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Gregory. Like, you can't just completely undo the
More
whole paradigm.
Montessori.
Yeah, Montessori is certainly a step in the right direction compared to traditional education. But the point is, a book is a conversation. It's a very long, drawn out, one-sided conversation. It's a monologue, right? And
The
to
other
do that
side is them
effectively,
stopping reading to think.
yeah, you have to kind of anticipate the state of mind that your reader is in because they can't interrupt you and ask questions and you can't follow the organic flow of the
That's what Twitter's
conversation.
for.
Sure. Yeah, if you want to argue with
They
people, go
message
on
you on
social
Twitter.
media. But a book is about just a one-way extended transmission of information. So you have to decide how you're going to do that. And one way to learn the best way to do that is to try to have this conversation in real life with people. See where they get confused, see where they get offended, see where things make sense and where they don't, right? And then you decide you can figure out pretty quickly what's the best way to approach explaining this thing that I know. The main theme we're talking about here is influence, hence the title, The Influential Author. If you
Yeah.
think you have something important to say, you want to change the way people think, the way they see the world with your important knowledge, your important perspective, a book is one potentially viable medium to do that. And depending on what kind of message you have, it may be by far the best medium to do that.
What would make it the best medium in your view, or maybe not the best, but one of the ones as opposed to
Yes.
like, so you'd rule out some and then out of the rest, book might be the best or one of the best sort of thing.
In the first chapter of this book, I answer those questions. In the chapter on the historical influence of writing, I make the case for why, even though we have many more modern ways of communicating ideas, much more modern technology, there's a reason that the fundamental form of a printed and bound book has not changed in a few hundred years. Because this is like our old standby of how ideas get spread en masse. Before printed books, there was really no scalability in the spread of ideas. Think about that. There was no real scalability in the spread of ideas before the printing press. If you wanted to get a message out to thousands of people, exponential spread, how could you do it? Just through oral recitation? Hey, tell 10
With
people this thing.
difficulty.
Tell them to tell 10 people each, right? Like a chain message.
Yeah.
You could do that. Of course, that's where our common cultural mythology comes from, essentially people just telling the same stories for generations. But you can't do long, complex, dynamic, important, paradigm-changing conversations that take hours that way, right? Somebody has to write something down at a certain point.
Hmm.
And for most of human history, only scholars could do that, right? Only a particular class of people could either write or read, or had access to resources like paper and pen to make painstaking manual reproductions. Then the printing press came, literacy rates started to grow, and now suddenly anyone can put their original ideas into a book and give it the opportunity to spread.
In this book, part 4, refinement, chapter 7, effectively editing your message. You talk about that within your book, and then you edited that part of your book.
Yeah, it's very meta, like I said.
What, in your view, are the key aspects of editing? How to do it right, especially if you're doing it all by yourself, your own book?
Well, editing, in my experience, at least with the way I do it, takes much longer and a much greater cognitive investment than the initial drafting process. And the reason why,
I'm going to say A is A to that.
um, uh, there are a lot of parallels to teaching English, actually, because at the advanced levels of somebody learning English, it's not about like memorizing more words or using the proper grammatical structure. It's constantly having to ask yourself, is this the best way for me to express this idea in English? Will this be understood as I intend it on a nuanced level beyond just basic communication using roughly the right words in roughly the right order?
The subtleties, not
Yes,
just the broad strokes.
right. Not just does this make sense, but is this the way an English speaker thinks about these things, interprets these ideas the way that I want both the connotation and denotation to come across in the way I talk, right? And that's a far greater amount of cognitive work than most people are willing to put into improving their English or editing their writing, because essentially that's what you're doing when you're line editing. The macro editing, the developmental editing is much easier in a certain sense because it's really just saying like, okay, what order do these
Interesting.
things need to go in, right? Do I really need this here? Now I can get rid of it, right? It's like when
Although
you're
a lot of
editing a
people
room.
have great difficulty with the no, I can get rid of
Yeah, killing your darling.
it.
But the line editing is what really,
Did you say
really,
killing your darling?
yes, common expression, kill your darlings. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter
I like
how
that.
long you spent writing it or how much you love it. If it's not right for the book, just get rid of it. But the line editing, where you actually have to go through every sentence numerous times and ask yourself again that question, is this the best way for me to say this? Over and over and
Right.
over again. It's so fucking draining, even for someone who's been doing this a very long time and has a very good faculty for it.
Going back to killing your darlings, over the course of writing, now having written 6 books and working on your 7th, has that become easier, less painful,
Oh
or is
yeah.
it still like
Yeah, I'm a
ripping out?
murderer of my darlings. I'm a slaughterer. I'm the Hitler of my
Do you
darlings.
save them somewhere?
If there's value in them. Remember,
The,
I told you there are these questions I go through. Is there anything of value in this passage? Is there any reason somebody would want to read this, even if it's for a totally different reason than I originally intended in a totally different context? If yes, I save it somewhere. If not,
would it be a
erase it.
darling if it didn't have value?
Well, sometimes you're just writing things because they're just what you're thinking, right? Like you're kind of just clearing your throat. Like, okay, here's what I think
Uh,
about this. Here's what I think about this. Here's what I think about this. And that can be a useful drafting exercise, but that's not the goal. The goal is to get through that as quickly as possible and get back into the state of mind. Okay, here's the important thing I need to draw attention
if
to
they're
and
good for
articulate.
you, even if it's just for you, though, save them somewhere, though, right? Digital space
Like
for
as a
text
journal?
isn't that. I mean, if you've been typing, do you type to do your first draft?
Yes, I exclusively type. I don't write anything out by hand.
Interesting. Is that an explicit decision you made that you won't be writing by hand to draft anything, or is it just habit?
No, I'm just much better at typing than writing with a pen or pencil.
Uh,
I can't
have you
imagine.
tried it? I think I'm not sure if it was Ayn Rand or perhaps someone else who it might have been J.K. Rowling even. It's difficult to remember. Recommended it because it. I don't remember exactly, but like it connects you more
Mm,
to what you're
I think it
writing
would slow
in
me down a
some
lot. I
way.
know some people who prefer to do that at least with the first draft, but for me, I need the freedom to like erase a sentence, rearrange a sentence, move things, change a word as soon as I have an idea.
Right,
What is a better way to do this? My mind is very, very active and frenetic when I'm drafting.
right.
Some people
So
live and
maybe it's
die.
two different kinds of
Yes,
mental working.
some people say, when you write your first draft, you shouldn't pause for anything. You shouldn't make any edits or any changes. Just keep writing. Just get the words on the
I
page.
think Ayn Rand said that herself in
And I'm
The Art
not
of
like that really
Nonfiction.
at all. I'm a very much edit as I write kind of person because
Huh.
as soon as the sentence is written, I might immediately think, wait, no, there's a better way to say that. Right now that I see it, wait, change that word, move this thing around, and then go back to drafting. I guess I kind of have a
And does that not get in the way
creative
of
brain.
you then continuing to draft? Does that not
No,
impede the
no, for
creative
me it
flow?
doesn't. No.
Damn.
I would be like too distracted if I couldn't do that. I'd be thinking, wait, no, there was a better way for me to write that. I'd be like trying to keep in mind all the things I need to go back and change once
Right. It
I'm done
might be a two
drafting.
different kinds of people sort of thing.
Yeah,
For some
I
people, the
yes.
shift is clearly in favor of you got to leave it now because if you try and tamper with it now, you get like into editing mode and then you're too
Yeah.
hampered to do the creating.
And
And for
there's
other people like
definitely
you,
yeah, it's weighted, right? Like there is an
yeah,
editing mode for me, which I think of as destruction more as creation. But even during that, I don't stop myself from creating. Like if I suddenly think, oh wait, I need to include a paragraph about this, I'll write that fucking paragraph, even though I'm
A
in
is
editing
A.
mode, right? So it's weighted. It's like 75-25 or 25-75, either production
Ah,
and editing or editing and production creation and destruction, right?
Yeah, of
But
course, if you're editing and you come up with a gem of a thought, you don't just go,
exactly.
oh, I'm
Every change
editing.
you make
Oh,
inspires you more because you have a clearer idea now of exactly what is supposed to be done. Only when you're in the
every
final
change
stages.
you make.
Sure. When you're in those final stages of like the final proofread is when you're like, okay, I'm now finally content with every sentence that's in this book. And you can only get to that point when you've read it 100 times, right?
99 not enough.
99 is not enough. It's got to be 100. A lot of people, the most help they need is just a good editor. They're quite good at drafting. They're quite good at writing. They have lots of interesting things to say, but really they just need someone to go through with a knife and say, okay, slice this out, shorten this here. You don't need this. Let's, even my own
Is it
books.
because they're not competent enough to do it themselves or not willing or
It could be any number
other
of things. It could
reasons?
be a time thing. It could be that they're really fucking busy people and they already invested a lot of hours just in writing
Right.
content. And so they don't want to spend another 100 hours trying to edit it themselves, so they'd
Hmm.
rather just give it to someone else and pay them some money. And that's a wise investment of their resources.
Do you think anyone can be a self-editor of their own book, so anyone can write and fully edit their own book
Well,
if
I
they have,
I write
a
and
good enough
fully edit
grasp
my
of English?
books, but I say, at the very least, you should do the first rounds of editing on your own book. Never
Right.
just give a completely rough draft that hasn't been revised at all to someone else because it probably won't make much sense and your intentions won't be clear. And it's important that revision process is important for you to like reflect again, like I've been saying, on your purpose for the book. So at the very least, the first rounds of editing should be done by you before it gets too refined and you give it to someone else because you have to, even if you hire someone else as an editor, you have to be able to clearly articulate to them and show them what your intention with the book is. Otherwise, they're just overwriting your choices with theirs.
Is your vision, right? So
Yeah.
if you
So you
haven't
you
done any
can't be
editing yet,
lazy.
your vision isn't clear,
Most likely it
sort of
won't
thing.
be. Right. If you haven't done
And
any editing,
so
it's likely there's still holes in your vision.
I guess then the standard for giving it to someone else to edit then would be, is my vision of the book already clear from what I have written and what I can communicate
Right.
about it? Or do I need to work more on it myself before that vision can be made clear?
Yeah. You don't get to be lazy in this process. You have to do serious cognitive work on the thing you're trying to communicate, even if you do end up handing it off to an editor and proofreader.
Chapter 5, The Qualities and Conditions of a Writer. I would have guessed from the chapter title, but not from the subtopics. Do you address the question, can anyone be a writer of nonfiction?
No, and I say fairly early in this book, most of the books on the subject are gonna like be really supportive and encouraging. Hey, write your book today. Everyone's got a book in them. I'm saying very much the opposite. I'm saying from page one, I'm going to do everything I can to discourage you from writing a book because it's not for everyone and it's a hell of a lot of work if it's going to be halfway decent at all. And so if you still want to write a book after all the discouraging I'm going to be doing, then maybe you're one of the few who actually should write a book because you have something worth saying and you have the skill set and the mental faculty to express it as a book.
So is it then the selective everyone of everyone who is willing to suffer through the trials that make it so that they can produce a book that's worth
Everyone who is
producing?
sufficiently motivated and has the proper skill set can write a book, certainly.
Skill set meaning
You
something
have to be good
that,
with words, obviously. But more than that, like I was saying before, you need to be good at organizing your ideas, that working memory, that ability to see how everything fits together. I have worked with authors who, frankly, lacked that skill set. They were fairly intelligent, they were fairly articulate, but they could not organize their ideas. And that would have been fine if they'd been more willing to listen to me, like as an editor and consultant. Like, okay, here's what I'm hearing you say. Here's what I'm hearing you want to go in your book. Here's how I think you should organize it based on what you've told me. I've taken that approach with some authors quite successfully. And with others, they just absolutely could not take anyone else's advice about what their book should be. They had to have
poor
complete
guys.
control over every little thing. Which again would have been fine if they had the skill set for that. If they could have
Yeah,
organized their vision, brought it to life exactly the way they
like
did, but they just
you
couldn't do
can
it.
have your cake, but you can't eat it too, or you can eat your cake, but you can't have it too. They had to have one or the other, the allowance to let you do stuff with it to make it an actual book that's worth anything, or the ability to do it themselves.
A huge thing I repeat throughout this book, because again, this book does cover the entire process of writing and publication, is
Base.
to realize that there are so many steps to this process that it's pretty much impossible that you're going to be good at all of them, right? I'm not a
Ah.
cover designer, for instance. I'm not
Oh,
a
that
graphic
answers
person
the
at all.
question that immediately came into my mind. Are there any aspects that you're not good at
Right. So I'm
or that
very good
you
at the
don't
writing
do?
and editing part and the organizing and ideas, which I would say is the most important part. But a lot of the other little things I'm not very good at, right? And so I'm humble enough to know what parts I should outsource to other people. I'm still overseeing the process. I'm still organizing everything. I still know if a cover looks good to me or not, right? But I'm not a cover designer, for instance. And I'm not a
Although
formula.
the cover of this version,
That's the title page.
um,
Yeah. That's still
oh, is that not
still
the
in here.
cover? Right.
This is the new cover.
Yes, of course, your
Same title
cover is
page
not
though.
going to be right. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is
I
just
did
lacking cover. Got
I
it.
did choose this piece of
I
art
am
for the
smart.
cover. It's from a public domain art called the Scholars Table. I liked it because it's a bunch of books
Ah,
stacked together in a really disheveled way, which is how how my room is organized, just piles of books everywhere, and how a lot of writers can certainly relate.
tinier room,
Um,
man.
so I gave this image to my cover designer and I told her, okay, here's generally the feeling I'm looking for. I want it to look more or less like this. Can you please turn that into an appealing looking cover? And she did a good job. It's about, being an effective and efficient entrepreneur and manager of this whole process of producing a book. Figure out what parts you feel most comfortable doing yourself, and then figure out what parts you should outsource to someone else. It's a good approach to
Um,
life. Division of labor.
Chapter 2, introspecting what to write about, why you're motivated to write and communicate, what you dare to become known for, and where passion, experience, and demand converge. So this is the why and the what, why you would write something in the first place and what you would write, right?
Yes. Why do you care
Um,
enough to write a goddamn book besides just your own vanity? Reason number one is that you have something of unique value and importance to say, right? Which could be as simple as I'm fed up with how shitty all the books on the subject are, so I'm going to write a good book about this subject. It could be, oh my God,
you
something
with
incredible
this.
happened to me, and I want the world to know. I feel like the world should know. I think they'd find this really interesting, kind of that autobiographical thing. It could be here's some expert knowledge that frankly just isn't very well known. There's just not reliable information on this, like the tax book we're talking about. There just weren't any good books
Yeah.
on the subject. There are some more now, some of which have directly copied Olivier's book. They've tried to
Oh,
to copy his title and his cover design because his book was pretty successful. So other accountants got the
copy the
idea, oh,
title. What
I
kind
should
of
write
fucking bastard does
the
that?
same book. And I have learned by working with various kinds of experts in various
Ooh,
fields now that it's surprising how often some knowledge just is not available, like online, even on blog posts or in how-to videos. The only way to learn some kinds of information is to hire an expensive consultant, like a couple $100 an hour, to tell you how something works or to do it for you. And I think that's the way the consultants like it, right? Because they want that information behind a paywall that they control. And so if you identify what some of that hidden knowledge is, and you can be the first to put it into a book that only costs $20, your book might be very successful if there are lots of people seeking that information. I helped a guy produce a book on the bail bond process in America because shockingly, there was very little reliable information on that.
if you're writing a book that you think is probably fairly unique, but you're not quite sure, do you actively seek out, has anyone else written this, and then read it? Or, like, if you want to write it because you think you're talking about your own thing anyway, should you avoid reading anyone else's, because that makes it harder to write your own thing by
I
their
addressed
ideas
that.
about it filling
Yeah,
your head.
I addressed that in the book. In my
And
case,
then
what I do, because I don't want to write a book that's purely just as like a market response to other people's books. Oh, I noticed there's a hole in the market, so I'm going to write a book about it. I have to first be coming from a place of authentic, inherent passion, right? And so I start writing the book that I know I want to write, regardless of what other books may already have been written. But somewhere in the process of drafting, maybe as the editing is starting, that's when I start looking, okay, what other books have people already written on this subject? What are they doing well?
when in the process did you
Usually
say
when I
you
start
start
the
looking?
editing, like when the initial drafting is
Right.
done, that's when I start to
So
actually seriously research my
the
competition.
you of it is already on
Yes,
there
because
in
I already
some
knew
at
I
least crude
wanted to
form.
communicate these things. This was my passion to communicate these things. Then I start looking at, okay, how does the competition frame their books? What kinds of things have they already talked about to death that I probably don't need to include in this book? What
And
are
then
they doing poorly? What do
at
people
that
complain
point,
about?
then do you think you can more freely take in their ideas because you've already
Yes,
got your book, so it's
yes,
much harder for it to affect it too much. You could get
yes,
ideas about possible changes to make, but
yes.
um, you've got the meat there. So yeah, something like that.
Yes, because I've already articulated the things that I authentically wanted to say in my own voice, and then it's just tweaking and refining. Okay, everyone has already explained this concept, so I can probably just remove to this even whole chapters sometimes you could take out because you realize that oh, I actually don't even need to address this thing, right? But it may just be a
So
paragraph or a page.
you're the authentic author
Yeah, I'm an authentic
writing
man
the
in
influential
general.
author.
I'm an authentic person, which is something I think more people should strive to be in all areas of life, not just authorship.
Integrated, a whole
Mhm.
person,
Yeah,
not someone who sells themselves out for the sake of values they don't deeply hold.
yeah.
Choosing the most effective title and subtitle. So, how do you choose titles for your books?
Okay.
And I guess subtitles, but more titles.
Yes. So there are many possibly valid approaches to this, but one trap to be cautious about is that the titling approaches and conventions that work for traditionally published mass bestsellers won't necessarily work for you as a small self-published author because you don't have the same marketing reach necessarily as the traditionally published books. So, for example, one-word titles might work
Uh,
really well, like anti-fragile. Right? That's a good title. You know, it's exactly what it says on the tin, right? That's what it's about. It's about being anti-fragile, right?
and it's kind of two words anyway, because anti and fragile.
Right. But I'm looking at the title as a sales pitch, as a value proposition, where if I hear the title, even if I know nothing about the author and their credentials and their background, I've never heard of the book before, none of my friends are reading it and recommending it to me. If I hear that title or see it written down, does it spark my curiosity? Does it make me
Does
think,
that
oh,
include the subtitle,
yes,
or is that more hidden?
yes. Well, of course, the main title gets shared more than the subtitle, but yes, the subtitle is definitely included in the value proposition. Am I going to read that and think, oh, this book is going to tell me things that no other book has told me, right? This is going to cover a really interesting subject in a really interesting way. That probably sells more books for unknown authors than anything else, because especially
Is
when you
that
write your
your
first book.
standard for a title? Like, if you come up with a title idea, that's the standard you run it through.
Yes, because I have to assume, even though I have written 6 books now, so a lot of people are um, owners and readers and enjoyers of more than one of my books, so I have at least a small following, I have to assume that the majority of the sales of each new book is coming from someone who's never heard of me, doesn't know anything about my writing style and my perspective. So each new book is a sales pitch on its own that has to convince people, hey, this book is worth your time and your money. I have to create that attractive effect. Oh, that looks interesting. I've never seen a book like that before. That's what sells books for me in the way
And
I
even
write,
for
at
the
least.
most avid readers, they're not necessarily going to get to the description of a book. They don't judge positively enough from the
Right.
title and
The
subtitle,
title
right?
and to a degree the cover design are usually the first point of contact, right? If that doesn't grab their attention, they're not going to click on the book listing, they're not going to read the description, they're not going to look inside and read a sample of the first chapter or whatever else they might do to help them decide, is this a book I want to buy? Right? That title and the cover design has to convince them, yeah, that looks like it might be worth my time.
Do you begin writing with a sort of working title in mind or near the beginning, like shortly after you've come up with an idea?
I've
Or do you have no title in mind whatsoever and then at some point, oh, what about this?
I think it's generally better not to have a title in mind because it biases you too much. If you have been
Right.
referring to your book a certain way for a year, it might make it harder for you to see that that's not necessarily the best title for the book. But I have done both ways. Uh, Sometimes, more often, I just refer to it as like, oh, the book about romance, or more time
Okay.
like the sexy book or
The
the book about
friends approach,
economics.
the
Yeah,
one with
the one about, yeah, until I can get a
the
much more
one with
specific
sex.
idea. But often too, in the process of drafting, you come up with certain phrases, certain terms, certain descriptions that just seem really, really appropriate for what you're talking about. Right. So then it's hard to
Right.
leave those behind once you know, okay, this perfectly captures what I'm trying to say in this book.
As in while you're writing it, like phrases you
Yes.
use or phrases you think
Yeah.
of while
Yes.
right.
So write those down, keep them in a little document so you have time to review over them well before publication, and you decide, yeah, this is definitely the best title.
To conclude, what would be the main thing you would say, the main criteria people should use to judge as to whether they should buy this book? Why should people buy this and not some other book or no book and not right?
Well, obviously, you should only buy the book if you're seriously considering becoming a nonfiction author and want to know how to do that and publish your work. But beyond that, if you're struggling to choose between the influential author and virtually any other book written on this subject, I would ask, are you a smart, serious, dedicated person who likes to dive headfirst as deep as possible into a subject and understand it from all possible angles? If you are, this is the right book for you to read. You will probably be as disappointed as I was with all the other books on this subject.